from 2012 from 2012 to 2016, and she introduced the I Voted Today stickers to all Philadelphia polling places. Stephanie studied math and computer science at Yale and Stanford, completed a PhD at New York University, and earned tenure from Haverford College. Stephanie has written 2 books on mathematical physics. Please join me in welcoming Stephanie Singer.
Well, thank you so much, and I'm so sad not to be there in person. I was all set to come on down to Eugene and take a few days at Belknap Hot Springs and really do it up, but I just didn't feel safe traveling right now. So I hope at some point I'll be able to come to one of your events in person, because who wouldn't rather be sitting around a table lifting a beer? So I wanted to talk about our U.S. elections fair, and how would we know if they were? How would we know if they weren't?
Yeah, good
I
question.
wanted to start with my own personal story, and I should say it will become clear which side of the aisle I would sit on, but I believe first and foremost in democracy before I'm loyal to my country, and to democracy before I'm loyal to any party. So I hope this will not make anyone feel uncomfortable, but it is part of my story. So I grew up in Washington, D.C., and had some contact with presidential elections. My dad's law partner, Sergeant Shriver, ran for president in 1972 and 1976. I was 8 and 12 for those elections. When I was in high school, my brother's best friend was William Mondale, who's the one on the right there. Isn't he cute? Good looking guy. So we had like real personal contact with people running for president. And so I started volunteering for presidential campaigns. When I was in graduate school in New York City, I volunteered for the Dukakis campaign, and that election day really made a huge impression on me. So it was, it was particularly exciting that day. First of all, because I was sure my candidate was going to win. If you've ever worked hard on a campaign, you know your candidate's going to win. And also, they sent me on election day. They sent me up to East Harlem to canvass. To give people flyers saying go vote, to stand in front of a polling place with flyers saying vote for Dukakis, that kind of thing. And this was amazing for me. It was so supposedly at the time, East Harlem was a dangerous place. But I went up there and there was so much life there. There was salsa music spilling out of the storefronts. There was so much excitement, and the people were beautiful, and I just loved it. And because it was election day, I just as a white girl was completely welcome. It was completely clear why I was there. It was completely clear that I was connected to them. And that was the first day that I felt so strongly what I've felt on every election day ever since. It's the feeling of connection to everyone else. I think it's because on election day we come closest to some of our ideals, like the ideals of equal opportunity, of equality. Because although there are many people who live in the United States who cannot vote, but that's another issue. But for those of us who can vote, we really are one person, one vote, no matter how much money we earn or where we live and that kind of thing. So, and democracy allows us to live together, even if we disagree vehemently, without getting violent. Because if enough people agree on something, we can get it done. And if we can't get something done, it's because not enough people agree, or not enough people care, or not enough people care enough. And it was this 1988 election day that really, when I really fell in love with elections. So fast forward to 2004, I worked, I volunteered substantially for the Kerry campaign in Pennsylvania, where I was living at the time. I was a voter file manager. I went to the campaign office every day for several hours to do data work for the campaign. And on election night, I went to sleep early. I always go to sleep early on election night because I'm exhausted. And at the time, because of the exit polls, it really looked like Kerry was going to win Ohio and hence the nation. So I went to bed like, yeah, my candidate won. And I woke up, wait a minute, what happened? and after that election, there were some statistical studies. There were statistical studies published that showed real discrepancies between the exit poll data and the official results. And that's what got me really thinking about how can you tell whether an election was fair? How do you know? How do you know? And that question really drove the next many years of my life up until the present. So I started looking into, could you compare the number of people who voted to the number of ballots cast? That sounds like a really easy question, but in fact, it was really hard because you have to get that data and you have to get it in time to make a difference. So trying to ask this question, I ended up suing the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania because they made that data very expensive, and I thought it should be very cheap under the open records law, and it turned out I convinced them. And that also brought, for the first time to my attention, the Philadelphia County Board of Elections, because they were the ones who had the election results. And they would, at the time, anyone could go get them. You could go to the office and you could get them on paper, 25 cents a page. So I started advocating to have them electronically. And at the same time, I got involved at a very local level. I ran to be a precinct captain, or in Philadelphia, they're called committee person, for the Democratic Party in my neighborhood. And so simultaneously, I got more and more interested in the larger policy question. What data would you need? How could you tell? What do you do if people are voting on voting machines that leave no record of what they did while they were voting? At the time, there were a lot of voting machines that were either touch screen or push button, and the voters' actions just kind of disappeared into the guts of the computer, and where they might not be altered, or they might be altered, and who knows. And at the same time, I was working my way up fairly quickly through the Democratic Party hierarchy. I became a ward leader, which meant that I was in charge of a committee that got information to about 20,000 Democratic voters in the city of Philadelphia. And then eventually those things kind of came together when I ran for office in 2011. I beat a 36-year incumbent, very corrupt, really a fabulous character. I mean, on the one hand, I had a lot of respect for this lady for being who she was, but who she was a very corrupt actor in a very corrupt system. So to everyone's surprise, except mine, I was the candidate. I was sure I was going to win. We beat her, and I got myself onto the Board of Elections. And over the next several years, I served on the Board of Elections. And by the way, I served with Al Schmidt. He actually has become rather famous person, at least for a little while. He's one of the election officials who got death threats and who testified very movingly in Congress. Anyway, so there I am, next to fame, right? But the really important things I think I did in office, a couple things. So kind of the big ticket things were that I voted today stickers into every polling place in Philadelphia. It was the first thing I did when I got into office, and I think it may be the highest impact thing I've ever done. Second thing that I'm really, really proud of is that there was a voter ID law introduced in Pennsylvania that year. It passed the legislature. It was really draconian. It didn't allow exceptions. It didn't allow, there was no workaround. I did a lot of the data work and the advocacy from within government as a government official to fight back against that law, which was eventually ruled unconstitutional. But there were smaller things that were really important to me. For example, I was on the County Commissioners Association of Pennsylvania, which is, and I went to meetings and I served on the board and I served on committees and I got to know my colleagues out in the rural counties of Pennsylvania. And that meant a lot to me. I mean, it's hard now because I see this dream slipping away, the dream that that we can at least work together on fair administration of elections. And that for me has been very difficult over the past year or so and has gotten in the way of the relationships that I formed then that were very dear to me and that now are difficult. So, okay, so that was my time in Philadelphia. I called out a lot of corruption while I was there. I reported things to the authorities, and therefore people did not want me to have a second term, and they arranged for a judge to kick me off the ballot for not having enough signatures when I had enough signatures on my petition, which was it was devastating. It was devastating, and I up and moved to the West Coast. Thank goodness for Oregon. I love it here. By the way, so when I arrived here, it was just after John Kitzhaber had resigned because his partner had some kind of business that had something to do with something he had some control of. And coming from Philadelphia, from Pennsylvania, where the corruption is bipartisan and very strong, it was just astounding to me that a governor would resign over such a thing. I mean, right now there's a councilman on Philadelphia City Council. He was not just indicted, he's been convicted on several federal charges. And he's like, yeah, but you know, the rules say that I don't have to step down until my sentencing. So he's still on the council while he's waiting for sentencing. And nobody, or almost no one, almost no elected officials in Philadelphia have had the guts to say, get out of here, because they're all scared of the electricians union. All right, so after that, I moved to Oregon. I hung out my shingle as a election data expert, done a variety of projects. The one that I'm proudest of is called the Vote Visualizer, and it's a system that allows people to visualize election results and compare various results. And it's at the base, it's a system for collecting and consolidating election results quickly from all across the United States, which is difficult because every state and territory and the district, they have to publish their results, but they publish them in whatever format they feel like. So it's a big deal to be able to do that. So that's been my major project for the last couple of years. Okay, so we want to ask, is democracy fair? And a big thing to keep in mind is that democracy simply is not easy. Democracy is very hard, and there are a couple reasons why democracy is so hard. One is that elections are big. So in this last presidential election, almost 160 million Americans voted. 160 million. So if you were to have a line that had 160 million people in it, that line could stretch all the way around the equator. That's a lot of people. So elections are big. Elections are sporadic. So on the left is a picture of a door of a church. If you have a church in your neighborhood, it's a church today, it's a church tomorrow, it's a church this Sunday, next Sunday, the following Sunday. And if you don't go this Sunday, you can go the next Sunday. It's there. You know where the church is, right? Polling places, it's not like that. It's one day, or 364 days a year. It's a school gym, and then on the one day, it's a polling place, right? So elections are sporadic, and all the infrastructure that you need for elections, for the actual balloting, for the actual checking who is allowed to cast a ballot, all that stuff has to be kind of assembled. It's almost like a wartime, it's almost like a war logistics thing, right? You have to assemble things in a place for one day, and then you got to take them all down and take them home. And that makes elections hard. Elections are hard because they're detail dependent. This picture is 2 different ballots from 2 different Florida counties in 2016. In one county, Hillsborough County, they put the instructions across the top of the ballot. In Broward County, they put the instructions down the side of the ballot. And that detail pushed, in Broward County, it pushed the U.S. Senate contest down to the bottom of the ballot, and a lot of people missed it. So little details about, what order you put things in on the ballot can actually make a difference to the behavior of voters. Election officials have to be very, very careful with details, and there are a ton of details. It's just very detailed. But the biggest reason that elections are difficult is that elections are about power. Right? I mean, they have consequences. It really matters who wins. And that's true of the presidential contest in the United States, but it's also true of your school board and your town council. People who are elected control resources. And that's why they're difficult, because people want resources. There are not enough resources to go around. And so the temptation to cheat is very high. There's real, I remember when I was a kid, I grew up in a very privileged family and milieu, and I remember the philosophical question, if you needed a medication but you didn't have enough money for it, is it okay to steal to get the money to get medication to save, your kid's life? And I kind of didn't understand that. I was like, well, how would you not have enough money to buy medication to save your kid's life, was how I was. Anyway, that was me as a kid. But the fact is that people do need these resources, and they need them to save their kids' lives. They need them for things that are very dear and visceral, and that makes elections hard, because it's hard to expect people to act well when they feel so much is at stake. So one thing that I learned as an election official and working closely with elections are so big and so sporadic and so detail oriented, and there's so many forces on them. Are they ever perfectly fair? Not in my experience. And to me, the question became, how fair is fair enough? So one of my answers is that fair is fair enough when people choose voting over violence. Another answer I've come to is fair enough that any large enough group can organize its way into power. So are US elections fair enough? That's a question worth discussing. And I don't know the answer right now. And that's very, that's frightening. That's frightening. So one thing I do know is that to have fair elections, it's up to us. There's a lot of work to be done to have fair elections, and it's up to us either to do it or to choose not to do it. I don't think that having a working democracy is something that automatically happens. It's something that needs care and work, and not just going to the poll and voting, but much more than that. And it's really an open question to me whether Americans really, really want democracy. That's an open question to me, and has been for a while. That's not in response to the last several years. It's the last 4 years. It's something I've wondered for a while. So my question to you is, what will you do for democracy? If you do want democracy, what will you do for it? Would you go into battle for it? You personally, would you? Would you protest peacefully for it? Would you run for office? This is me. I loved running for office. I loved being in office. I loved the whole thing. Yeah, it was great. It was great. Okay. All right, let me move on. Would you organize? So would you be part of some little neighborhood group that's going around and just talking to people in the neighborhood? This is the grungy work of politics, is getting to know, doing things in your neighborhood, getting to know your neighbors, and making things happen. Little things, cleaning up the blackberries that have overgrown some beautiful park, deciding to welcome a family of Afghan refugees, whatever it is. Would you work the polls? Well, okay, in Oregon, you can't really work the polls, but there are some jobs you can do on a temporary basis at the Board of Elections. And I really recommend you go do them. It's really great to be part of that. Would you vote? I mean, to me, that's the minimum. That's the minimum. So, yeah. So this is just to remind you, if you want to get involved, start small. It's so easy to be distracted by the national stories and, the horse race of are they going to pass that voting bill or are they not? And, what did Mitch McConnell say today? And what did Nancy Pelosi say yesterday? But that's like a spectator sport. If you really, really want to do stuff, well, look, you all are already in your Rotary Club, right? You're already doing something. You're organizing locally for yourselves. And I'm guessing you do some things. You don't just get together and have talks. And that's really what it takes. And a lot of people in the United States, certainly a lot of people I know, are absolutely distracted by, the front page of the New York Times. And I think that's a waste. If you spend 8 hours a week reading the New York Times and spend 0 hours a week out doing a project with your neighbors, you're not using your time very well, in my opinion. If you care about democracy and the fabric of civil society, that is. Okay, so that's it. This is me. This is how you can get in touch with me. And thank you so much for this opportunity. And I'm looking forward to answering questions and hearing what you guys have to say.
Thank you for that, Stephanie. All right, we've got time for some questions. Dan.
Stephanie, thank you very much for all the work you've done over the years regarding the integrity of U.S. elections. One of the things you talked about a little bit was how Oregon is really has been out front with regard to a mail-in ballot, sort of an exclusive mail-in ballot. I'd be interested in hearing a little bit more about your thoughts on the benefits of an all mail-in ballot. And my understanding is that Oregon's approach over the years has been very bipartisan, that both Republicans and Democrats have been pretty supportive of the current system, but yet somehow that has come into question on a national basis, the mail-in format. So I'd be interested in your thoughts on that, and how maybe the misperceptions about mail-in ballot. I've always been very surprised that more states have not moved in that direction. So I'd be interested in your thoughts on that.
So first of all, coming from, I really cut my teeth in the polling place. I told you that story about New York and standing in front of the polling place, and I cannot tell you the number of hours I spent in Philadelphia, outside, around, near polling places, talking to, polling place officials, talking to voters, talking to candidates. And for me, actually, it was quite a shock to come to Oregon. And I remember in my first election in Oregon, I went down to the Multnomah County Board of Elections because I just I couldn't bring myself to just put it in a mailbox. And I do miss the sort of the civic gathering of election day, and the stickers, and the excitement on the streets. So, but I've come around. There are some really wonderful things about voting by mail, and one is that you just have the time with your ballot. And if you want to, on your own, do your research with your ballot right in front of you. You can mark it in pencil, and then like, is this what I really want to do? And then fill it in pen. You can, if you want, sit down with neighbors. I often get my ballot and I realize, wow, I have to vote on this thing. I have no idea what it is. I call my friend Suzanne. Suzanne, do you know anything about this? And that is absolutely lovely. Yeah. It's a cultural thing too. I mean, one thing about mail ballots, voting by mail, is that they are susceptible to, if there's someone on the inside of the Board of Elections, they are susceptible to corruption. And there was actually a case in Clackamas County, I don't know, 6-8 years ago, of someone filling in some of the down ticket races at the Board of Elections. So again, there's no election that's totally fair. The question is it fair enough? Is it fair enough? And also, I think it has a lot to do with the culture, and this goes back to the business about Kitzhaber. One of the things that I also really love about living here is that people in Oregon feel entitled to fair elections and entitled to government that's not corrupt. And that makes a huge difference. I mean, people in Philadelphia don't feel entitled to that. And if you go back and you read Lincoln Steffen's autobiography, there's a conversation there with the ward boss of Philadelphia. At the time it was a Republican, now it's a Democrat, and that conversation, it could have happened with the ward bosses I knew. I mean, it's like nothing changed between 1900 and 2010. Nothing. And it has to do with, I really think it has to do with culturally, what people feel entitled to.
Thank you for that, Stephanie. Up next, we have a question from Jim.
Yes, my question is, why don't we have a member from each party counting the votes? That way there can be no question, because both people have to verify that, yes, this is the way it is. But we have a system where only one party tends to count the votes, depending on who's in power. Doesn't it make more sense that we could end up with fairer elections if we sort of put a counterweight to the, shall we say, the lack of integrity of some people?
So in many states, actually, that's exactly what happens. And Pennsylvania is and I agree, that is the strongest protection is for people with for the adversaries, all adversaries, to have eyes on the process. And in Pennsylvania, for general elections, that is true, because each party is part of counting the votes. And that's set up in law at every level, from the Board of Elections, the County Board of Elections, down to the polling place. I actually am embarrassed to say I don't know exactly what the law is here. I suspect that there is bipartisan eyes on the counting at the county board. Certainly Colorado, which I know a little more about, there is. They are an almost entirely vote by mail state, and they have teams from the two parties. Just a note on that. So I'm a big fan of that, and I kind of don't see how you get protection otherwise. And one of the issues with that, though, is that in a primary, it's more difficult to say who. I mean, in a primary, you can say, well, every candidate should have be able to have eyes on the process, but in practice, there are many challengers. Like when I was running against the party machine, I didn't have the organization to have someone in every polling place watching out for me. So you need a big organization to be able to make that effective.
But as to follow up, now there are states that do not have that process in place, and I think that those are states that we can justifiably question results. I mean, we know that there's been corruption in voting from the time the first vote was taken. And how much corruption, as you asked, how much corruption are we willing to put up with, and what's the true effect of that corruption? So and our politicians continually use it as a weapon, as a cudgel to beat the other party with, and it's just exhausting.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jim. We have a couple hands raised in person, so I'm gonna, I can't tell who that is, but I'll let you speak.
That's okay. It's Andrew.
Lisa and Andrew.
Okay, Lisa, you want to go first?
Sure, I can go first. I'm gonna get to the mic. Hi, thank you for a great presentation. I do have a question, and it's a quandary that sort of came up to me during your presentation when you talked about in anti-democratic societies, we have an inkling that they're undemocratic because we see violence. But on the other hand, I would like to ask you, what is the relationship from your experience between democracy and meeting basic human needs? I think when we look at food injustice, for example, we see people riot. They don't have sufficient food or resources to get food. In the other cases, I was looking at a lot of the participants in the January 6th insurrection conspiracy. Many of them are just incredibly poverty stricken. So what is the relationship between democracy, meeting human needs, and violence in your opinion?
So,
sorry, that's a big question.
So my aspiration for democracy is that if enough people, if your democracy is functioning, and if enough people need something and care deeply about it, they can organize to get it by making through elections, through the mechanism of elections and holding government accountable. I think one of the most damaging things of the last couple decades was the Citizens United decision that allowed so much corporate money in politics, because now we have, we have one person, one vote, but there's so much money in politics, and it makes it impossible, really impossible for people who in elected office to ignore the people who have a lot of money and who can either fund their campaigns or fund the campaigns of their opponents. And I think that the food insecurity issue, why isn't democracy in the United States helping with the food insecurity and other manifestations of poverty and of just downtroddenness and people stuck in all kinds of traps that at least in theory a government might be able to help do something about. Why is our education so terrible? Why is our healthcare so terrible? I think that the more the voting part of democracy is a counterweight to the money part of democracy, the more people get what they need, even poor people. But it feels very out of whack to me, the money part versus the people part. I don't think you ever get rid of the money part. It's just inevitable. People with resources can use them to campaign, to affect elections, but there is a huge matter of degree.
Yeah. So
Thank you.
my takeaway is that money is a corruption to democracy, from what you just said.
Absolutely.
And we'll have our last question from Andrew. Andrew, we can't hear you.
Okay, sorry. Stephanie, I was surprised to hear or to see when you were raising the question of what is fair enough, that you seem to come down mostly on qualitative factors. And here you're a data scientist, but yet you talked about corruption, you talked about the role of money. I mean, you talked about all these other things. What is it on the quantitative side that lets you answer that question or not let you answer the question?
So the quantitative stuff comes in operationalizing from the answers to that question. I don't think it's a quantitative question. I mean, so here, let me give you an example. So one thing that happens in Oregon, shame on us, is that we allow ballots to be sent over the internet by email. This is incredibly insecure. And we do it, people in the military, right? Like, of all the ballots we should be protecting, right? So this is really a problem. But because we're talking about very few ballots, it's actually, on the scale of where the problems are, it's not the hugest problem. It's not the highest priority thing, at least not in my view, to get rid of that, because there are so few ballots coming in that way that it's unlikely to affect the outcome of a contest. So in the details, when you're digging into any particular possible source of unfairness or corruption or error in an election, it gets very quantitative. But the big question is, it's not a quantitative question. I mean, how lucky are we that there's any structure to society at all, right? I mean, chaos is so possible. You look at people displaced by tornadoes or whatever, right? I mean, chaos is just, we're protected from it. Many of us are. And so the question of what's fair enough really is a qualitative question. It's a philosophical question. It's a political question. It's not a data question.
Thanks.
All right, thank you very much for your presentation, Stephanie.
One more question.
Paul has a question.
Oh, well,
No time.
All right, it looks like we have just a couple minutes for announcements and then transition into happy dollars. So do we have, and Stephanie, you are welcome to stay for the administrative part of this. We'll be going until 7, but we will not, our feelings won't be hurt if you have to take off.
Okay, no, I'm happy to stay a bit, and maybe I'll get a chance to answer that other question. You have like happy hour after?
We
If you like, yes. She said she'll stay after to answer your question. If there's happy hour.
all right, it sounds like some folks are happy about that.
Okay, I'm gonna go get a beer while you guys are doing your administrative stuff.
All right, thank you. Do we have any announcements?
Hi, Jessica. This isn't an announcement so much as just an update. We did, the fundraising group met tonight, and we have an opportunity to partner with the Emerald group. And so we're going to take the steps to do that. And we're looking at probably early May for a fundraiser. So more details to follow, and we'll keep you posted.
thank you.
Thanks.
That is exciting. Thank you, Steve. Do we have any other announcements? And I've got one that I'm going to just read very briefly. I got an email, and so I'm just going to read you this sentence and then tell you what's next. It says, Rotary International has been invited by the White House coordinator for Operation Allies Welcome to participate in conversations with numerous service and community organizations around ways to support the more than 100,000 men, women, and children from Afghanistan resettling in the United States. And this email that I got came with a survey that has a series of questions asking about our club's interests in supporting refugees from Afghanistan. So I'm going to put my head together with Paul to figure out how best to approach this. And it may end up being in an email. I won't have us go through all of the bullet points orally, but it may end up that I email this out and ask folks to respond. This may be an easy a yes or no for some folks, but for others, it may take some thought. But the question is essentially whether or not we are interested in supporting, and more specifically, whether or not we'd be interested in getting certified to provide initial support services to folks who've arrived. So you will see more to come on that from me or Paul shortly.
Great, thank you.
Any other announcements? Holly.
I'll do a transition here. I'll pay some happy dollars, but there is a refugee